Hi, Janice.
Hi, Anthony.
Today, let's talk about how to choose the right executor for your will. And this one comes from fatherly.com, written by Daniel Kurt. Thanks, Daniel. Nice post. Janice, take us away.
Absolutely. Before we start, I think it's important that we give a little bit of information on what is an executor. So could you help us with that? Just
Sure.
explain it to us.
The executor is the person who you name in your will so that when you die, this is the person who's in charge of shepherding the whole situation and getting everything into your heirs' hands. And what I mean by that is doing all the legal and tax work and also all the bureaucratic work to change it from, dad's bank account into the estate and then eventually into checks to son, daughter, and wife. Does that make, again, after all the bills and taxes have been properly paid off? As that's just a super simple example, yeah.
Yeah, super simple, but what you're saying is it's a pretty big, important job that there's going to be a lot of moving parts for.
For sure.
Yes. So this article is great. So it's explaining that when you're choosing this executor, what you should think about. The first line is great. It says, knowing that your financial house will be in order if you meet this untimely end will help you sleep a little easier at night, which is true. You have all of this. You want to make sure it's taken care of. So what's the first thing? Trust. Trust is key. You want someone who's honest, trustworthy, and responsible, which sounds, like it's a pretty no-brainer. But, you have to really think about, even though you have a sibling, is that really the right person who's going to be, trustworthy and make sure that everything is done?
So I feel like this this category falls under common sense. I mean, who would choose the shady cousin to be their executor? So if I can add to this, rather than just limiting it to thinking about trust, why not think of it from a human behavior perspective and think about, at least as of now or for the foreseeable future, whose incentives line up properly. And what I mean by that is if you have somebody who you love and trust dearly, but they're under extreme financial pressure in their personal life, right, for whatever reasons,
yes,
they might be more tempted to act out of character because, again, they're normally trustworthy. So try to maybe think about who would be have the least motivation or temptation to abuse what it's a very powerful position. The executor has their finger in a lot of different accounts, right? So that's why trust and hopefully incentives and temptations should be taken into account.
Definitely makes sense. Even if it was intentional or unintentional, you want somebody that's going to really be in that correct direction during this whole process. They said even if your will isn't that complicated, it's still going to be a lot on that person's plate. Yeah. So another thing to take into consideration is age. So let's say you made your will eons ago. You named someone as your executor, and you end up living for an extremely long time. Don't revisit the will. Is your executor still able to fulfill the role? Is that person, you got to figure they're aging with you. So what's their health like at that point? Are they able to do it? So it's something to think about. You talk about revising your will every couple of years. Just give it a good look over. Right. Is this something you would take into consideration during those looks?
Yeah. So again, nobody here is Nostradamus. Who's that famous predictor?
Yeah. Good job.
Very good. Nobody can predict how long their friend's going to live over the next 20 or 30 years, right? I mean, nobody can do that. So just give yourself a break and just think about what's reasonable to anticipate in the next 4 to 5 years. Because I generally recommend that you take a look at your situation every 4 years, every presidential cycle, every Olympic cycle, every World Cup cycle, whatever works for you, right?
The Olympics of your will. Yeah.
Again, give yourself a break. Don't try to map out the next 20 years because just nobody can do that. Okay, but within the 4-year context, if you're picking somebody who's, in their late 80s, but who's really in great mental health, are they going to be in great mental health in their early 90s? I mean, that seems a bit on the risky side, right?
Right. Right.
So that's one way of looking at age. But on the flip side, you also want to look at, we talked about this before, Janice. If you have a trusted sibling who's in their, let's say, late 20s, early 30s, and you're like, oh, they're very responsible for their age and they don't have much going on, so they'll be a good choice. I mean, in the next 5 years, what are the chances that that person's going to get married, have their own kids, be starting we're going to have a newborn? I mean,
my goodness.
That is not a good candidate for an executor because it's a very time-intensive job. So That's another way of taking age into consideration, life stage, not necessarily just the age as a number.
Right. Will they have the time to answer emails and do things if they have an infant? I don't know about you. When I had an infant, I don't think I could breathe, let alone take care of as an executor.
When we had our young ones, if someone asked me to do an executorship, that's an easy pass.
Oh yeah, that's a no, thank you. As soon as I can get more than 2 hours of sleep, maybe we'll talk. But yeah, that's a good thing to keep into consideration.
Or if they take it, I mean, you're going to have this sleep deprived, cranky.
Right. What kind of decision making, skills are you going to have? I know I didn't have any. I had barely any thoughts at that point. But
exactly.
You talk about. I'm sorry, not you. This is brought to us by Daniel. Right. He talks about one person being in charge of the will. You've seen this. I'm going to ask you for a couple examples of co-executors, meaning they maybe meant well, thinking the two children should act together as one unit to take care of the executor. The problem with that is for co-agents is that each person has to sign each piece of paper, make each move together, and be completely and harmoniously in sync with every move. Yep. I don't know about you and your siblings, but there's nothing harmoniously in sync that happens. So it could definitely lead to some fighting and some issues. So he suggests going with one primary representative to manage the estate.
Yeah, Daniel's absolutely right on this. It happens. There are some situations where you just need to get more siblings involved or cousins involved, whatever, as co-executors. But if it's avoidable, you want a single person in charge. And that person is the one who lives by the sword and dies by the sword. That they have all the power, but they also have all the responsibility and all the accountability. There's a couple of reasons for this. If you have multiple executors, like you just mentioned, Janice, just marshaling notarized signatures from everyone for every step of the process, it pretty much just doubles the amount of time this thing's going to take.
Oh, absolutely.
You've helped with, I don't want to say the name of the estate, but the brothers in Pittsburgh and the sisters here. Yeah. So you just know that it's, if one person holds it up,
yes. And then if something, they have to get redone, then you start the process all over again. And it's hard. Yeah. You have to send it to one place, who sends it back, then you send it back there. And I mean, you're talking for one document, you could have it go, it could be out there in the world for 2-3 weeks before it's returned with all the signatures.
With all the signatures, right?
Yeah, with all the signatures, yes.
And that's the bureaucratic side of it. If there's a substantive difference of opinion between two executors and you're in a deadlock, you have to go to court to resolve it. I mean, that's just a huge waste of money. Let one person be in charge and let them defend their decision at the accounting, which is the closing or the end of the estate, instead of getting stuck during the middle of the whole process.
Right. Absolutely. So just try to stay away from that if possible. But if you, and I talk about this every time, if you have a professional that's helping you set this up and with your estate plan, they're going to talk to you about the pros and cons of having co-executors or using a professional executor. They're going to give you that information. This is not a DIY thing that you should do. You should go with a professional to make sure it's done right. For another example, just learn the residency rules where you live. So I'll need a little help with this one. I know that some states do have a residency, some do not, but you may have to furnish a bond if you're out of state or out of country. I know, which could be complicated for the executor and the heirs. If you have someone out of country, I know we have dealt with that. Yep. Just sending one document alone to another country can be challenging because they may not have a notary at their disposal.
Very good. So, okay, just rolling back. First of all, this is a complicated area. I don't want to get into all the details. I do have a book coming out in 2 weeks called How Probate Works that'll talk about in greater detail these types of situations. Right? It'll be available on Amazon. So without getting into the details of the bonds and this and that, just generally just figure out what are the rules. What is the easiest path, the path of least resistance? And it's most likely going to be you need an executor who lives in the county or at least the state where you will likely be when you pass away. Right? State courts just realize that it's way harder and way more complicated to have even somebody from Connecticut administrating a New York estate or New York doing a Pennsylvania estate. I mean, there's just so much nuance and local rules and local customs that they just want somebody local who will know what they're doing. Yeah,
it's just easier. And it's also easier on the executor too. If you are administering an estate in California and you live in New York and you have to go there in person, you think of the cost and I think it would be pretty complicated.
Yeah, for sure.
And then know when a trust makes sense. Sometimes a trust, it makes more sense. Now, again, I go back to if you're sitting with a professional, they might steer you in this direction as your plan makes more sense to go with a trust. They'll tell you that. You'll give them the information and they will guide you. Is that accurate? That's a good way to look at if that a trust is better. They're going to let you know.
Yeah. So for more, there's a lot of different types of trusts, but for most people, we're talking about the kind of trust that will help you avoid probate or basically avoid the courts after you pass away. But everything else is still the same. You still need, whether it's a trustee or an executor, you'll still need somebody to take care of the assets, taxes, debts, and make sure everybody gets paid out properly. So a lot of what we've talked about already is still true. But yes, depending on your state laws and depending on how sort of brutal the probate courts are in your state, you can do sort of a cost-benefit analysis with your professional about whether or not it's worth it to set up a trust or just use a will in your state.
Awesome. So they'll be able to help you with that based on where you live and the information.
Is that it, Janice?
It is. It's a good article just to get you thinking. And like you said, your book is coming out. That's going to be a good thing to look at if you really are starting to get into planning and how it's going to work for those that you will choose as your executor.
Very good. All right. Thanks to fatherly.com. Thanks, Daniel. This was how to choose the right executor for your will. Check it out. And we'll talk to you next time. Bye, Janice.
Bye. Talk soon.